This video will delve into the terrible things the conquistadors did to Native Americans, shedding light on the harsh realities of this dark chapter in history. Main goal of the conquistadors. The Spanish conquistadors embarked on their expeditions with clear and ruthless goals. Their primary objective was the acquisition of gold and wealth. Hernán Cortés, known as the conqueror of the Aztec Empire, epitomized this drive. Arriving in Mexico in 1519, Cortés was motivated by the promise of riches and a deep desire to claim territory for Spain. Similarly, Francisco Pizarro, known as the conqueror of the Inca Empire, sought to seize the vast stores of gold and silver rumored to be in the Andean region. These ambitions were not just personal, but also served the broader interests of the Spanish crown, which sought to expand its empire and influence in the New World. The spread of Christianity was another significant goal of the conquistadors. The Spanish crown, aligned with the Catholic Church, saw the conquest of the Americas as an opportunity to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity. Missionaries often accompanied expeditions, and the conversion of native populations was pursued with zeal, sometimes through coercion and violence. The conquests of the Aztec and Inca empires are among the most famous expeditions, and they illustrate the devastating impact of the Spanish invasion on indigenous civilizations. The fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 and the capture of Atahualpa in 1532 marked the beginning of a new era of Spanish domination in the Americas. Cultural genocide. The arrival of the conquistadors marked the beginning of a systematic campaign to erase indigenous cultures. This cultural genocide was most evident in the destruction of native religions, languages, and traditions. The conquistadors, often backed by missionaries, sought to impose European customs and religious practices on the indigenous populations. This imposition was brutal and relentless, with little regard for the rich cultural heritage of the native peoples. One of the most tragic aspects of this cultural genocide was the burning of codices, particularly those of the Maya and Aztec civilizations. These codices contained invaluable historical and cultural knowledge, and their destruction led to an irreparable loss of understanding of these ancient cultures. The Spanish viewed these texts as heretical and sought to eliminate any trace of the indigenous belief systems they represented. Indigenous practices were suppressed, and European customs were enforced. Traditional rituals, languages, and social structures were outlawed, replaced by Spanish norms. This enforced assimilation extended to all aspects of life, from dress and governance to social hierarchy. The imposition of European culture was not just a byproduct of conquest, but a deliberate policy aimed at erasing the identity of the native peoples. Theft of resources. The conquistadors' hunger for wealth led to the plundering of the Americas' rich resources. Gold and silver were the most coveted prizes, and vast amounts were extracted from regions like Peru and Mexico. The legendary silver mines of Potosi, known as one of the richest sources of silver in the world, became a symbol of the exploitation of the New World's resources. The wealth extracted from these mines and others fueled the Spanish economy and contributed to Spain's position as a dominant European power in the 16th century. Land seizures were another method through which the conquistadors enriched themselves at the expense of the indigenous populations. The encomienda system, known as a form of feudal exploitation, allowed Spanish landowners to claim large tracts of land and force the native people to work it. This system led to the dispossession of indigenous lands and the erosion of traditional agricultural practices. Beyond gold and silver, the conquistadors also exploited other natural resources, including crops and minerals. Diseases brought by the conquistadors. One of the most devastating consequences of the Spanish conquest was the introduction of diseases to which the indigenous populations had no immunity. Smallpox in particular wreaked havoc on native communities, causing massive population declines. The disease spread rapidly through densely populated areas, such as the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, and decimated entire communities. Forced labor and enslavement. Slavery was another method of exploitation used by the conquistadors. While the Spanish initially relied on indigenous labor, the high mortality rates caused by disease and harsh working conditions led them to import African slaves to supplement the workforce. This practice further devastated indigenous communities, as families were torn apart and traditional ways of life were disrupted. Cruel punishments. The conquistadors employed a wide array of brutal methods to suppress resistance and assert their dominance over the indigenous populations. Torture was a particularly common tool in their arsenal, with techniques such as flaying and branding used to inflict extreme pain and terror. Flaying, the act of removing the skin from a person's body, was not only excruciatingly painful but also served as a horrifying spectacle designed to instill fear. Branding, where hot irons were pressed onto the flesh, was another method used to permanently mark and humiliate the victims, making them symbols of the consequences of defiance. Public executions were another grim feature of the conquistadors' rule. These executions were often carried out in the most visible locations to ensure maximum impact. Hangings and burnings at the stake were among the most favored methods, chosen for their ability to draw large crowds and create a lasting impression. The sight of an individual being hanged or burned alive served as a powerful deterrent, reminding the indigenous people of the dire consequences of opposing Spanish authority. These public spectacles were not just punishments, but also psychological warfare, aimed at breaking the will of the entire community. Amputation and maiming were further tactics used by the conquistadors to impose control and punish those who dared to resist. Cutting off hands or feet was a common practice, particularly for those accused of theft or rebellion. This form of punishment was both physically and psychologically devastating. The maimed individuals were left as living reminders of the power the conquistadors held over life and limb. The practice was intended not only to punish, but also to prevent further resistance by instilling a deep fear of retribution. One of the most notorious figures in this regard was Nuno de Guzman. Known as a particularly brutal conquistador, Guzman was infamous for his use of extreme violence to subjugate the native populations under his control. His actions exemplify the cruelty that characterized much of the Spanish conquest of the Americas. In examining the terrible acts committed by the conquistadors, we uncover not only the physical brutality inflicted upon native populations, but also the psychological terror that ensured their submission. These were not mere acts of violence, they were calculated measures designed to break the spirit of entire cultures. The conquistadors' ruthless methods, ranging from torture and public executions to the maiming of individuals and the manipulation of fear, left an indelible mark on history. For more insights into history's most profound lessons, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Together, let's continue to explore the past, not just to learn about what happened, but to understand how it shapes our present and future.